So you're moving to Atlanta, Georgia from another state, but you don't know if you should rent or buy it first. In this video, I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to think about before making that decision. And that's coming up right now. Hey everyone, welcome back to Living in Atlanta. This YouTube channel is all about helping you get to know what it's like to live in the Atlanta area. My name is Mark Brenner. I'm a local realtor here. And today we're going to talk about how to decide if you should rent or buy a home when you relocate to Atlanta, Georgia. Now, for many of you, this decision will be very obvious because of a life circumstance you have going on. You may have to rent or have to buy right away. But for many clients that I talk to, this decision is not as clear. And the issue is when I listen to the reasons for them wanting to wait to buy or to rent, it's usually not the best reasons to make a decision either way. So I thought this video would be helpful to give you a framework to help you and your family make this decision. So first we're going to talk about the pros and cons of renting versus buying. Then we're going to talk about the number one factor you have to consider when making this decision. And lastly, we're going to talk about some things to keep in mind whether you're renting or buying. So let's get right into it. Should you rent or buy a home when relocating to Atlanta, Georgia? So let's get right into the pros and cons of buying versus renting. Now, a lot of these may be very obvious to you, but maybe they're not. These are some important factors to consider and should help you in making your decision. So for pros and cons of purchasing first and not renting would be, number one, you're not paying a landlord, okay? Paying a landlord for rent is kind of like leasing a car. Your money it's basically 100% interest payment every month. Whereas when you purchase and you make payments, obviously you're increasing the equity that you have in the property. And obviously that equity will turn into money in your pocket when you go to sell. Also, when you own a home, although the property taxes probably will gradually increase each year, you're not going to have a landlord who can arbitrarily increase the rent at their whim. So there's a little bit more stability in your monthly payments month to month. You're also realizing appreciation with the purchase of a home. The values in Atlanta continue to grow significantly year over year. And so obviously you're going to benefit in a lot of ways with the value of your home increasing over the course of your ownership. Of course, you also don't have to deal with a landlord and their arbitrary rules about what kind of dog you can have or what kind of condition the unit needs to be in when you leave. Obviously, you can have great landlords, but you can also have some pretty bad ones. That's not something you have to deal with when you own the home. And one of the biggest pros of purchasing to start is obviously you don't have to move twice. If your plan is to eventually own real estate either way in the Atlanta area, but you choose to rent first, there's a lot of flexibility with that, but of course, you will have to do 2 moves, and a lot of my clients end up doing this in 1 calendar year, which can obviously be kind of stressful. Now, in terms of the downsides in purchasing your property first, one of those would be flexibility. You're not going to have the same level of flexibility when you own a home as when you rent it if you don't like the neighborhood that you're in. Of course, you can always go to sell your home, but there's going to be a lot of factors going into you making that decision, and you may not be able to sell because you don't want to take a loss, in which case you could be kind of stuck in the neighborhood that you're in for a period of time. The other thing to consider is upkeep and expenses. When you own the home, you're responsible for everything that's going on with it, all of the major systems. If something breaks or needs repair, that's the bill that you have to foot, whereas when you rent, obviously that's the landlord's responsibility. So the major pros for this category would be, number one, you're not paying 100% interest to a landlord. You're essentially investing in yourself, in your own portfolio. You're owning something immediately that will increase in value over time. You're paying down the debt and increasing your equity, and you're not subject to the rules of a landlord. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of renting, which obviously I kind of touched on some of them when talking about purchasing. In terms of pros, by far the number one pro of renting would be flexibility. If you don't know the area, you're not sure what neighborhood you're going to be most comfortable in, when you come and rent a home in Atlanta, if you absolutely hate the neighborhood, not a huge deal. It's fairly easy to let your landlord know you won't be renewing the lease and you could pursue another neighborhood. Also, if you have a type of job where you move around a lot, you're probably going to be looking to rent because if you have to move to another city within a year or two, you don't want to risk selling for a loss after paying all those fees. So renting does make a lot more sense for someone who moves around a lot for their job. So you can change neighborhoods or even cities very easily when you rent, but also the whole process is also a little bit easier and less expensive. Now, don't get me wrong, it can be kind of stressful to get a rental in the Atlanta area because there's a lot of demand and there's a broad array of experiences depending on if you're renting from a large property management company or from an individual landlord. But really, when you're renting, all that you really need is first and last month's rent, maybe a pet deposit. There may be an application fee for the rental that you have to pay for. But obviously, you don't have to put a large down payment like you do when you go to buy. You don't have to pay closing costs. You're not paying property taxes. And like I said before, if there's some kind of damage going on with the property, that's the landlord's responsibility to take care of. Now, in terms of the cons of renting, again, I kind of mentioned them already in talking about the pros and cons of buying. One of the biggest ones would be if you are going to be staying in Atlanta long term and you do plan on buying, you're going to have to do another move. And each month, that money that you're going to spend for your shelter is kind of like leasing a car. It's not going back in your pocket anyway. You're just paying the landlord. They're realizing the benefits of the appreciation and their increase in equity. You are essentially paying someone's mortgage without owning the home. So those are some of the pros and cons in renting versus buying. Let's talk about the most important factor for how you can make this decision. So what are the most important factors you should be considering when deciding between renting and buying? Well, the reason that I'm talking about this is because when I listen to clients' reasons for doing one or another, often I hear things like prices going up or down, or interest rates going up and down. And while those are important things to consider and forecast, I don't think that's a great way to make this decision. You have to understand there's an inverse relationship to sales price and interest rates, okay? Now, a few years ago when we had rock bottom interest rates, a lot of people were telling me they're going to hold off on buying because the prices has gotten out of control. Well, now all of those people are sorely wishing they had purchased because the interest rates are in the high sevens. And although prices have come down a little bit, their buying power has evaporated to a large degree. So all that to say, timing the real estate market, in my opinion, is a fool's errand. As interest rates come down, prices are going to go up and vice versa. So there's no perfect time to purchase a home. My philosophy in owning real estate is that you work backwards from what a comfortable monthly payment is for you and own in any scenario that you can. So if I'm telling you you should not be as concerned about the future of interest rate or prices, what is the thing that you should be concerned about in making this decision? Well, if I had to boil it down into two main factors, it would be familiarity and flexibility. Familiarity would be your familiarity with the Atlanta area. If you have never stepped foot in this city, if you haven't even visited, if you have no idea what you're getting into, I'd probably gently push you slightly towards renting. Unless you do what I suggest and I've talked about this a lot in this channel, they do a discovery trip. When you come into town for a weekend or a few days, spend your time driving around areas, going to restaurants, seeing the traffic patterns, seeing a few homes, looking at the architecture, and really getting a sense for what is going to work for you or what's not going to work for you neighborhood-wise. So I have had people who have not spent much time in Atlanta. They came into town for their discovery trip. They got comfortable. I helped them purchase a home. And honestly, it's always gone really well. So that is an option. However, if you don't have the time or the means to do that discovery trip and you're not familiar with the Atlanta area, honestly, the big benefit of renting is that you can just dip your toe in the water, okay? A realtor, myself, or whoever you're working with can give you some suggestions of safe neighborhoods that will work for your criteria to rent. You can rent in that area for a year, and then if you love it, great. Maybe you look to purchase in that neighborhood, or maybe you discover another neighborhood that's going to work better for your needs. And then you have the flexibility to go buy a home in that neighborhood. So really understanding the Atlanta area in what's available and what your needs are and what neighborhoods are going to deliver and what the most important factors for you is going to be one of the most important things in making this decision. If you're already extremely familiar with the area, you lived here before, you visit here a lot, or you have family here, I'd probably nudge you a little bit more towards buying right away, since you probably have a much better idea of what neighborhoods are going to work or not work for you. Now, the other one, of course, is flexibility. This one is pretty self-explanatory. Again, if you have a job that moves you around a lot, renting is going to make a lot more sense. Of course, you can sell your home at any time. If you're looking to sell it in a turnaround of a year or less. Because there are fees that go along with selling your home, the values in Atlanta do increase quite a bit year over year, but after 1 year, you might be looking at a loss unless we had an extreme swing. So, just flipping your property and selling it for a profit within 1 year, it definitely can happen, but it's a bit of a stretch. So if you do need that flexibility because of your job or just because of your lifestyle, obviously renting is going to be a little bit better for that. Now listen, I'm not a financial advisor, but my advice for you is to take everything back to that monthly payment. What is a monthly payment for shelter that you're not going to feel stressed out about? Now think about what can you do in terms of renting versus buying with that monthly payment. Now, all other things being equal, I think anytime you can own a piece of property and be within a comfortable monthly payment for shelter, then that's what you should do, unless you need more than average flexibility for the reasons we already discussed. Now, of course, the down payment is going to be a factor here as well. If you want to purchase a home, you're going to need at least, in most scenarios, 3.5% to 5% down payment. That might not be the case if you get a VA loan or some other kind of zero down payment loan, but for most people, you're going to need a little chunk of change to put down. So if you don't have that amount, obviously, you're probably going to be leaning towards renting to give you time to save up for that down payment. But in terms of making a smart financial decision, I would take everything back to what your monthly budget is and what works in that payment, regardless of what the prices or interest rates are doing. All right, so we talked about the pros and cons. We talked about the most important things to consider. Let's just hit on a few important points before we go that you should keep in mind. These are some simple things to keep in mind based on the conversations that I've had with clients trying to make this decision. Now, the first would be when you're looking to rent, you're probably going to need to sign at least a 1-year lease. A lot of people are surprised by this. You might be in a part of a country where you can lease month to month. Now, I'm not telling you that's impossible here. I'm simply telling you that the overwhelming majority of landlords will want at least a 1-year commitment, okay? If you want to know about the rental market here, it is very competitive like the housing market. There are more people looking to rent than there are available rentals. And so the landlords quite often have more leverage than the renter. Because of that, a lot of times you see 2 or 3 year lease terms, but on average, it's going to be 1 year. Now, you might find an individual landlord that will rent month to month. They typically trump up the monthly price to account for the convenience. Another option, if you're having no luck but need month to month, would be to go on Airbnb and approach these owners. You can make whatever kind of arrangement that you want with these people. I have seen that work with clients in the past where they just do a month to month on an Airbnb for however long they need. The other thing you should understand about renting is it's less uniform than the buying market, meaning the listings for rentals are scattered. Some are on the MLS, some are not advertised on the MLS. Some are on Craigslist, some are on Zillow, some are not on Zillow. Some of the large property management companies only advertise their rentals on their own websites, and some individual landlords may only advertise their rental with a sign in the yard. So all that to say, if you are looking for a rental and you're working with a realtor to help you find a rental, it's got to be a collaborative process. You literally have to be Googling for rentals in your area. Of course, you want to use the MLS and the Zillow apps, but you might want to also look at Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, being aware that scams are prevalent, but those are both still places where you can find good deals. Just be very careful that you can prove who the owner of the property actually is. Now, another thing to consider here is if you're coming from out of country, if you have not paid taxes in America yet, there's a good chance you may not be able to purchase property in the States right now. This is why if your intention is to buy property in the Atlanta area, you're coming here from another country, even Canada, it's important to talk to a US-based mortgage broker so that you can understand if you'll meet the criteria for being approved for a loan or not. Now, this whole topic can get pretty complicated and it goes beyond the scope of my expertise. This is really a lender's scope of expertise. You're getting into things like taxes and special visas and all this good stuff that goes along with, you might be a citizen, you might not be a citizen. There's a lot of factors that go into whether or not a U.S. bank will approve you for a loan. And so if you are coming here from another country, that's something you'll want to consider seriously. Now, a little bit of info about the rental market. It's fairly standard. There's nothing really wacky about the Atlanta rental market, but I already mentioned you're probably going to be looking at a 1-year lease. You're typically looking at first and last month's rent for a security deposit. you're almost definitely looking at a pet security deposit, and you're usually looking at an application fee of $75 to $100. In terms of restricted breeds for pets, I see these most often in the large apartment buildings. However, it's not as prevalent as other cities, and certainly not as prevalent as some cities outside of the States. I know in England, for example, there are pretty strong restrictions on bully breeds, and I have a lot of clients reaching out to me asking about that. I have seen individual landlords restrict these breeds. I have seen large apartment buildings restrict these breeds. There's not a ban in Atlanta on any breeds, so you should keep that in mind. So it's really going to come down to a case-by-case basis, but usually it has more to do with the size, the weight of the dog than it does the actual breed in terms of what kind of restrictions there are or what kind of fee is going to be needed. And the last thing I'll say about renting is beware of scams. I just mentioned that, but it's a very, very common scam for people to market a rental that they do not own, collect payment, and then you'll never hear from them again. So you need to work with a realtor or an apartment location company that can help you verify the person you're talking to does own that property. So I just want to make you aware of that. So there you have it, renting versus buying in Atlanta, Georgia. We talked about the pros and cons of renting versus buying. We talked about the importance of flexibility and familiarity in making this decision. And I touched on some random points that you should be aware of regardless of what route you're gonna go. So I really hope that was helpful in you and your family making this decision. Honestly, I've seen this work well in every single kind of way. The only thing that I would absolutely recommend you don't do is put yourself in some sort of time crunch where you have to make a decision about a purchase or a rental on a short timeline. That's when I've seen the most stress come about. So hopefully that helped you make your decision in renting versus buying. I would love to see your comments and questions below about what you want me to cover in the future. Of course, if you are looking to purchase a property in the Atlanta area, I love if you would reach out to me. I absolutely love when my viewers become clients. You can book a Zoom call with me using the link in the description below. My phone number and email address are there as well if you want to reach out. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and until my next video, I'll see you next time.